Good afternoon and welcome to Washington Week's digital show, Washington Week Recommends. I'm Yamiche Alcindor. Each week, I recommend great reporting that I think deserves your attention. And today I'll be speaking with Errin Haines. She's the editor-at-large at the 19th, a nonprofit news organization that reports on the intersection of gender, politics, and policy. And she has a new piece out this week. The headline, "It's been 100 days since Dobbs. What has changed?" She analyzes the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade and how it's impacting the country's most vulnerable populations and communities and motivating voters this midterm election year. And Errin, of course, joins me now. Thank you so much. We're great friends. So I'm so happy to have you on Washington Week Recommends. So I'll start. The headline is "What has changed?" So Errin, what has changed? What sticks out to you?
Yeah, well, Yamiche, it's so great to be with you, and thank you so much for highlighting the piece. I think what has changed is that for almost 5 decades, the abortion fight was delineated as, America kind of before and after Roe, and now that delineation is absolutely before and after Dobbs. And, the first 100 days, it's still early, but what we are seeing is both the country in chaos in terms of potential patients and providers trying to navigate a system that is now state by state and not really knowing what that's going to mean for what is allowed and for people's reproductive health care and abortion access. But at the same time, we see an electorate, many of them women who are more than half the population and half of our voters in this country, who are really being galvanized and mobilized around this issue. And, with 5 weeks to go until the midterms, it's unclear how much of a factor that it's going to be. But, as I say, every year, women are the deciders of the election. And I think that that's very much going to be the case in these midterms. So, while abortion is still not really among the top issues for voters 5 weeks out, I think that what we do know is that our country has changed pretty dramatically in the past 100 days. What we're still trying to figure out is exactly what direction we go in from here.
Well, certainly. And I want to ask you about the midterms a little later on, but I want to stick on this idea of the 100 days. Did you get a sense that these 100 days, that it's enough time to tell us what this country might look like in the next 100 days? Or do you think we're still sort of feeling this out?
We're absolutely still filling it out, especially as kind of these trigger laws that a lot of state legislatures put into place ahead of anticipating, right, the fall of Roe at the Supreme Court level. These trigger laws have been going into effect, and that's creating just a very varied landscape, frankly, for a lot of people who could become pregnant or thinking about being pregnant. All kinds of, I don't even know if I would say unintended consequences, because I don't even know that the full range of consequences was really anticipated in the wake of this decision by lawmakers, by the Supreme Court justices. And so really now contemplating issues of access to contraception, for example, of access to in vitro fertilization, for example. We have a story up on the 19th today about cancer patients who are not able to get the treatment that they need because of abortion restrictions that could impact them in certain states. And so this is a rapidly changing landscape. A lot of these laws are also being challenged in our legal system. And so, something that may be the law of a state today could not be the case tomorrow. And so what does that mean for somebody that's trying to get reproductive health access in one of those communities? It is so confusing and chaotic for the people who are trying to do this work and for people who are trying to access that care.
When thinking about sort of the chaos and who's impacted, you wrote, quote, "The existing disparities were only exposed and exacerbated by the Supreme Court's ruling in the wake of Dobbs. Many policymakers are ignoring the impact on marginalized communities," said a senior vice president for women's health policy at the Kaiser Family Foundation. You go on to write, "Grassroots organizations have stepped up in many cases to fill gaps, working to educate people about their rights and raising funds for patients to travel and pay for abortions. But these stopgap measures, they're no substitute for government support." So I have to ask you, who's falling through the gaps here when we think about the fact that the government isn't able to do as much as it needs to do, it seems like, and these nonprofit organizations, they're trying, but there are still people falling through the gaps, it sounds.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that part of who we are talking about, poor women, LGBTQ folks, Black women, absolutely, who already had maternal health disparities, even before the fall of Roe and life after Dobbs. I think these were things that certain communities had been trying to sound the alarm about well before, as we saw kind of state legislatures further and further restricting abortion access before the federal protections were completely gone as of June 24th. But I think that what has been striking is that a lot of these folks are in some of the same places where you don't have Medicaid expansion. So protections for people who, may have to carry a pregnancy to term, even if they didn't want to. What happens when that baby gets here? What are we, what is the same government that is kind of taken away their access to reproductive health? What are they then doing when that baby arrives and these services are those kind of support and safety nets are needed, and they're just not there, and lawmakers are not taking the necessary steps to kind of ensure that those children are able to survive and thrive in those same states.
Well, you're talking about safety nets and the sort of issues there. You note that there's a New York Times analysis that shows that the states that are banning abortion, they're also the ones that are most likely not to have safety nets. Do you have any indication based on your reporting that there are states that are changing their laws? Because I heard from a lot of conservative activists after Roe v. Wade was overturned, now we're going to turn and we're going to focus on social services. We're going to make sure that these babies are taken care of. What's your reporting bear out?
Yeah, I mean, I think that certainly was kind of what they were saying in the immediate aftermath of the Dobbs decision, but in terms of action, we have not seen very much action in that direction. And so what I think that you are seeing, though, is states with Democratic controlled legislatures, governorships that are moving to do what it is that they can do to kind of shore up access protections, not just for reproductive health, but also for these people who are potentially going to be parents or are parenting a child because they are, grappling with a pregnancy that maybe they had not intended. And so that is absolutely what we're seeing at the state level. And then obviously you've got President Biden, Vice President Harris, that administration saying that they are going to do everything in their power to also shore up protections and access. But again, in the absence of a national federal protection, whether that is a Supreme Court decision or a federal law that is ensuring access to abortion, you're continuing to see just kind of this patchwork of solutions that vary depending on what the politics on the ground are.
It's a good thing to sort of talk about sort of the patchwork that's going on around and what is happening there. You also mentioned Black women, which of course is something that both of us have ever been reporting on as Black women. I want to quote a bit more from your article. You quote Michelle Goodwin, who is a law professor at the University of California. She told you, quote, the same dynamics that have denied policies, including Medicaid expansion, have also long harmed Black people, particularly Black women. The denial of bodily autonomy in our democracy is not new. Errin, break this down for people, especially those who don't understand the unique challenges that Black women whose ancestors were enslaved in this country, the unique challenges that Black women are facing in this new sort of phase of our country.
Yeah, I mean, certainly not to equate or conflate these two things, but I think it is important to acknowledge the long legacy and history and reality that, for much of this country's history, Black women's bodies have not been their own. That was something that was true from the beginning from the very roots of this country with slavery, when you had, enslaved Black women being raped, being forced to have sex, basically forced to give birth to the labor that was going to be provided on those plantations at will, and they had no choice in the matter in terms of whether those pregnancies were going to happen. They had no choice, and so whether we're talking about the Jim Crow era, where Black women were raped as a form of intimidation and control, for decades. That was certainly a very terrifying era for Black women in terms of bodily autonomy and just control over their bodies, and the possibility, the very real possibility that they could also become pregnant as a result of that trauma and violence, right? And so, so many Black women who are living, again, in so many of these states where reproductive health, women's health care in general is not being prioritized, they are being disproportionately impacted. And that was true, again, even before the Dobbs decision. But what is new, and this is something that, talking to Professor Goodwin was really clarifying for me, was that, white women are really for the first time now experiencing kind of an erosion of rights and a lack of access as a result of this Dobbs decision. Their reproductive health care future is now being imperiled. And I think that is why you see so many of them now really being mobilized into the fight that Black women have been fighting really and been on the front lines of for years.
Yeah. Well, of course, I have to pivot back to politics, which is what you were talking about earlier. We're going to have to talk about Georgia. It's your home state. You spent a lot of time as a reporter there. You continue to report on Georgia. This week, Herschel Walker, who is the Republican Senate candidate, he was accused by a woman who says she is one of the mother of his children, she says that Herschel Walker, who is also an opponent of abortion rights, that he paid for her to have an abortion while she was carrying his child. I was down there all week. Republican voters are sticking with Herschel Walker. Some even told me they believe the accusation. Herschel Walker, we should say, is denying the claim. PBS and us, we have not verified these claims. But there are people who are telling me, voters saying, even if this is true, I don't really care. I'm still voting for Herschel Walker because he's an opponent of abortion rights for any case, including rape or incest. I wonder what you make of what's going on in your home state of Georgia and what it tells us about the midterms overall here.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I think Georgia is absolutely, it was already in the spotlight, as one of the key Senate races that is happening in this midterm cycle, and abortion has emerged as a huge issue for voters across the country in the wake of Dobbs. And I think that's absolutely true in Georgia. That's true in the Georgia governor's race, and it was true in the Georgia Senate race, even before these bombshell revelations, allegations against Herschel Walker emerged in these last several days. Look, I mean, what is really striking and which is so interesting about you just kind of being on the ground and hearing directly from voters is that, regardless of whatever, Republican strategists on the ground in Georgia may be saying, well, this is devastating for the Walker campaign. When you talk to voters, they are not abandoning Herschel Walker. And I mean, I think it's important to point out that this is really kind of just the latest issue for Herschel Walker that had the potential to kind of imperil his campaign, and yet maybe does not seem to be having an effect. I mean, whether we're talking about him embellishing various parts of his origin story narrative, or now with these allegations that he paid for an abortion, voters seem to be very forgiving. They still seem to be supporting him. And 5 weeks out, I mean, frankly, there really is no alternative candidate for Republicans. This is their nominee. And at least at this point, they seem to be really standing by him. So this continues to be a close race. We'll see what happens when these two candidates hit the debate stage in just a few more days, if that's going to maybe change anybody's minds.
We will definitely be looking out. That's going to be an interesting debate next week. Thank you, Errin, for joining us and for sharing your reporting. And thanks for all of you for watching Washington Week Recommends. You can find us here every Friday at 12:30 p.m. And be sure to tune in to Washington Week tonight on PBS. We'll discuss the latest in the battle for the control of the Senate, the Supreme Court's consequential new term, as well as President Biden's dire nuclear warning. Thank you again. See you this evening.